Whenever I do this two Bhagavatam classes in a series, I was thinking that I will try to do a quick overview of the whole chapter in those two classes while also addressing the specific theme that is there in those purports during the course of the overview. So let's look at this 22nd chapter and what is happening in it. And then we'll look at today's verse in context. So this 22nd chapter is in one sense bringing the whole the Bali pastime towards its culmination. And the first 11 verses are describing Bali Maharaj's acceptance of Vamandev's unprecedented punishment. We'll discuss briefly why his punishment was unprecedented. And he says he accepts it with wisdom and grace. So generally, if we consider a situation where somebody is being punished, not just some ordinary street criminal, but some very influential person is being punished. So usually it's not just not a small event that happens in some remote corner. So say if, for example, the head of state of a particular country is being penalized or tried in court or impeached, it becomes like a whole public spectacle. So Bali Maharaj is much, much more powerful than any contemporary head of state. For one thing, he was the ruler not just of one state or of one planet, but of the whole universe practically, including the heavens. And he was not just like a person who is elected for a few years and after that anyway is going to go after the term gets over. If the kings had power, they had power for life. And for such a person to be suddenly deposed from power, and it's one thing to have power and then to lose power. But it's like if somebody is wealthy and then from being extremely wealthy, they come to maybe mediocrely wealthy. Okay, they come to a middle class level from a high upper class level. That is itself difficult to accept, but that's okay. But if somebody from wealth comes to the level where, in America, the standard of poverty is you have to live in a car. In India, if somebody has a car, they're considered to be extremely wealthy. So if somebody says that I have to live in my car, oh, that's going to be considered poor. But if somebody is homeless, somebody has no money at all. So that kind of being deposed in that way is extremely difficult. So Bali Maharaj, he was the ruler of the universe at one moment, and a few moments later, he was not just no longer the ruler of the universe, no longer the ruler of his kingdom, but he was arrested. He was bound. He was treated like a criminal. So from the position of somebody who could judge people, who could judge criminals, and their fate depended on his decision, now he became a criminal. So this kind of decline in fortune can devastate people. People can just become suicidal when they lose fortune like this. But Bali Maharaj accepts Vamandev's punishment. Now we'll see why his punishment is unprecedented and how he accepts with grace. That is the first section. The second section is Prahlad Maharaj appears on the scene and Bali Maharaj offers obeisances to him. And Prahlad Maharaj himself is very effulgent and transcendental over there. And then Prahlad offers his prayers wherein he thanks the Lord for having freed Bali from his attachment to material opulence. So actually, he frees him from material opulence and thereby he frees him even from the attachment to that. So that's what Prahlad appreciates. And now after that, Brahmaji is about to speak. At that time, Bali's wife Vindhyavali comes forward and she says that actually, my dear Lord, ultimately you are the proprietor of everything. So she acknowledges the reality of divine proprietorship of everything and the delusion of those who think that they own something. Then after that, Brahmaji is there on the screen, on the scene. So as I said, this is a very powerful person, Bali Maharaj. And that's why now Prahlad Maharaj is his own ancestor. He's his grandfather. So his presence is understandable. But Brahmaji also himself comes because this is a really extraordinary event in the history of the universe. So, and Brahmaji requests the Lord to release Bali. Brahmaji's prayers are beautiful. He says that, my dear Lord, you're satisfied with even just a leaf or a flower or a little glass of water that is offered to you. And here Bali has offered everything to you. How can you punish him like this? And anyway, if you want to also, you have punished him sufficiently. Please let him go. And then the Lord speaks his heart. So the Lord explains how Bali has gloriously passed his test. And after explaining that, he says, how he tested him, what normally happens when somebody is materially opulent, and how that didn't happen with Bali Maharaj, or rather it happened with him for some time, but at the critical time, it changed. And then the last is Vamandev rewards Bali. And what are the rewards? 3 things. He says, you will become the ruler of Sutala, which is, although a lower planetary system, it is considered to be more opulent than even the heavens. And then he says, you will get my personal association and protection over there, for I will be your doorkeeper. And then he also says, okay, what you have lost now, that also you will gain. That you will get Indra's position in future. So this is the overview of this chapter with 36 texts in it. So now, in this particular prayer or in this particular section, what is Bali Maharaj saying? Basically, he starts with, first of all, saying that I will never be untruthful. That's the first 3 verses. He says, no matter what happens, my Lord, I will always honor my word. And then he goes on to say that even if I'm tested and punished, no, I will remain faithful, just the way my grandfather Prahlad Maharaj has remained. So there is an overview of his 11 verses also. Let's today, instead of going over it all, we'll focus today on the theme of this, which Srila Prabhupada talks in the purport, that how Prahlad remained unfazed even amid great challenges. And similarly, Vamandev is also going to remain unfazed. But let's go to that section based on the first section. The first section is where he says that I will not be untruthful. Now we will see in this pastime an evolution in the character of Bali Maharaj. So Bali Maharaj initially is a typical Kshatriya. He wants to fight, he wants to win. He is an expansionist Kshatriya, expansionist ruler. He wants to expand his kingdom. And in this particular pastime, here his devotion starts becoming explicitly manifested. So we'll look at that journey also. But initially, he's talking at the level of a Kshatriya. And what is the level of a Kshatriya? A Kshatriya says that I will honor my word no matter what happens. So for the warriors in the past, the word of honor was extremely important. In fact, it was like it was an irrevocable code. So what was that code? That is, if I give my word, then I will die, but I will honor my word. And we have many examples of this in the scriptures. For example, we see in the Ramayana, Dashrath Maharaj, he sent Ram away, although Ram was dearer to him than his own life. And he sent him away because that's what his word of honor obliged him to do. So he could have said, I never promised that to you, okay, but I promised, but it doesn't literally mean you can ask me for anything. It was something within reason. How can you ask something so stupid, so terrible? So that way, it basically becomes something like, so now he was really very, very serious about honoring that word, although it was very painful for him. So now the question comes up, why is the word of honor so important? So actually, it ensures that the powerful don't abuse their power when circumstances change in future. It comprises a formal and public commitment to the values that they are meant to live by. In general, we all may at particular times be inspired to buy certain things and resolve to live in a particular way. So for example, at the time of New Year, we may make some New Year resolutions, and sometimes we stick to them for some time, and afterwards it just becomes too difficult and we give up. Sometimes we're able to stick to them for a long time. Either way, what often one of the things that time does is it deteriorates our determination. So internally, time deteriorates our determination, and externally, time may in the future present different levels of temptation. So the soul exists in two coverings: the body, which you call the external world, and the internal world. And both of these can change. So we may make a resolution. So we could say that the resolution is coming from the soul. But circumstances can change in the future. Circumstances can refer to the inner circumstances of how our mind feels about it, or what kind of situations we face in the outer world. And when those change, it is very easy to just give up the resolution. And that's why there is the system of a vow. So what the vow does is, say for example, when people get married, there is a vow. Of course, there is no guarantee that even a vow will make people stick to what they promised to do at that time. But at least it creates some level of formality. Or when we get initiated, there is a vow. So we take that vow in a public forum. So where the idea is that formal commitment to those values, those principles, it ensures that even if our circumstances change externally, even if our mind changes internally, we stick to it. So, and this is especially required not just for everyone, but especially for those in power. So the head of state, usually, whichever country it is, when they assume power, they have something like a oath which they take. They read that pledge that I'll be faithful to my country. So this is a generic principle of the word of honor, but there are specifics also. But the idea is that the powerful, the word of honor makes them stick to their values, the values that they are committed to. So now what happens is that when is this word of honor valuable? When a person who honors their word is respected, and when a person who dishonors their word is disrespected, or is publicly, we could even use the word, shamed. So when that happens, that is when this becomes important. So now, why is infamy feared? Now, infamy is not just feared because it is, okay, it's going to hurt my ego. Okay, maybe it's a matter of the ego. But the important thing is that we need all the help we can get to keep sticking to the right path and to avoid going on the wrong path. Because in the world, it's so easy to get tempted and deluded and degraded. So what happens is infamy, at least in traditional society, would lead to shame. Oh, this person made a promise and they didn't keep it. And shame is a powerful deterrent from wrongdoing. Now, we may say that, yes, isn't shame a negative motive? Yes, of course it is negative. But love is a higher motive. And love also leads with it the desire to not displease those whom we love. That's a higher motivator. So that means that when we have this kind of love, say, for example, we may take a vow toward a spiritual master, or then if we revere and love our spiritual master, then we don't want to displease them by dishonoring our vow. So why are we talking all this? Bali Maharaj is saying that, yes, you asked me for 3 steps of land and I will not prove to be untruthful. Although Bali Maharaj will later say that, actually, my dear Lord, you haven't acted reasonably, but still I will honor my word. But so what we are discussing is, so Bali Maharaj's evolution. First, he says, irrespective of how you act, I will stay honorable. And then he says, but how you act is actually benevolent, even if I don't see it as benevolent right now. So love is a higher motivator, but shame works effectively too for those who don't have that love as a motivation, or those whose love is not strong enough. Because within us, yes, we may respect and love someone, but the world's temptations can sometimes overpower that love. So we could say that for us to go on the right path, we need to see the value of going on that right path, the value, the glory, the wonder of going on the right path. But we also need to see the horror, the shame, the disaster that awaits us if we go on the wrong path. So when these two are stark and clear, then the impetus to choose rightly becomes strong. So infamy, so Bali Maharaj says that, I will never, I will not allow myself to act in a way that will bring me infamy for not having honored my word. Now, infamy is devalued today. It's almost expected that, say, for example, today's leaders, the politicians, it doesn't matter in today's world so much. They sometimes make promises. So they shake hands before elections and they shake confidence after the elections. They make promises and they nonchalantly overlook the promises. Now, it also depends on how much the media holds them accountable, how much people hold them accountable. But sometimes the public memory can be notoriously short. And just a new scandal comes up and the past gets forgotten. So now, in today's world, the impetus for not doing wrong, which was present in the past. See, infamy is, you could say, it's not so formal like trying a person in the court and punishing them. So if somebody does something wrong, something criminal, you could punish them. So, but if somebody just simply doesn't honor their word, does that make it criminal? Well, it depends on what way the word is not being honored. So if it's a word of honor in terms of a business contract, maybe violating it is criminal. If it's a word of honor in terms of, say, a marriage vow, then maybe it's family law. If it's a word of honor, it's a vow in terms of some spiritual commitment, well, that's not going to be considered illegal. If it's an election promise, then that also is not, you can't be held, it's not a legally binding contract that I'm going to do this. So there is something which is illegal, which can be punished through the due process of law. And there is something which we would say is immoral. It is immoral to make a promise and not keep it. So the formal courts can hold accountable those who are illegal. But what about those who are immoral but not illegal? So then that is where the society's overall culture comes into the picture. And the society looks down on those who are immoral. Then what happens is that becomes a deterrent for them from acting wrongly. But if the society glamorizes it, then what happens is then it is unfortunate. Society just now society can also be multivalent. So if a person is very corrupt and then they get away with being corrupt, and then their social circle appreciates, oh, you're so clever, you did this deal and you got this much kickback, oh, you're so smart, then that gives them a further kick to do that. So basically there is this infamy is a very important motive, and it's not simply the ego. We could say, as I said earlier, we need all the help that we can get in doing the right thing. And we could say the culture of infamy, or rather the culture of the word of honor and infamy for those who don't honor the word, that uses even the ego to get us to do the right thing. So everything can be used, even the power of the ego can be channeled constructively. So now that's the first point. Now now the main point of the talk is that now Bali Maharaj, he saw something terrible. He says, I tried to offer charity to the Lord, and what happened is that I'm being bound over here. This is atrocious. Now many people, when they see bad things happening to them, then they start losing faith in God, in the goodness of existence, in the goodness of people. So now that's why we need to see with intelligence, not just based on our immediate experience. What do I mean by that? That actually the scriptures tell us repeatedly that the Lord's intention is always benevolent. Suhridam sarva bhutanam. He's always benevolent. However, his actions may not always seem like that. Why is that? Because his actions are motivated at multiple levels and our intelligence is finite. So example could be, say a doctor gives injection or a surgeon cuts the body. Now all these things, what's happening over here? That actually speaking, immediate experience is pain, but the eventual experience would be improved health. So when we face a very difficult situation in life, when we have terrible things happening to us, so how do we respond to it depends on what we focus on. If you focus on the immediate experience itself, this is terrible, how could anyone do like this, how could anyone act like this with me? So now what evidence do we see means, let's consider this. Yeah, if we look at our experience and we look at the worst experiences we have gone through, then the inference would be this universe is chaotic, there is no principle of law over here, actions don't lead to corresponding reactions. We might say not only is the universe chaotic, we might also say the universe is cruel because it deliberately hurts us. However, if we look at the best experiences in our life, we can come to a very different conclusion. The universe is benevolent. Now, what do I mean by looking at the best experiences or looking at the worst experiences? The point is that our minds are finite. So whenever we are trying to assess a situation, it's very difficult for us to immediately have all the evidence in our mind to process. So we zero in on some evidence. So that's why the mind is impulsive. The mind is not completely irrational. But what happens is the mind just zeroes in on some evidence. How could this be happening to me? I'm such a good person. I try to always do good to others. Why are people doing like this to me? Why is life like this to me? Why is God like this to me? So yes, there are times when we have terrible experiences. But if instead of fixating on those experiences, we expand our frame of reference. Now, if we look at our life, we will see that there are times when we are unfairly singled out, or we get bad things happen to us, even though we don't deserve them. At the same time, if we look at our life, good things have also happened to us. And if we are honest, we can say that there are good things that are better than what we deserved. It requires not just honesty, but a certain level of humility to admit that. But it is definitely true that, say, sometimes we may study very hard for an exam. I've asked this question to students all over the world, and almost everybody agrees with both these questions. So I asked students, has this happened sometime that you studied very hard for an exam and you didn't get good marks, good grades? So many raise hands. Yes. And then if I ask them, okay, has it happened that you didn't study very well, but still you got good marks? And yeah, a good number raise hands there also. They say, yeah, I studied only a small part and that's what came in the exam. And I did well. So if we look at the miracle of existence, if we consider how vulnerable life is, leave alone the good things happening in our life, we could say even our existence itself is a miracle. If you study the process of birth, how the sperm goes and meets the egg, that itself is a precarious process. So many things can go wrong and the sperm may never reach even the egg. And then even while the child is in the womb, even if we from a biological perspective consider that nature has designed the womb to be a safe place, but still so many things can go wrong over there. And the child may not even be born. So normally we talk about birth and then death. But the world is so dangerous that there can be danger even before birth. That's what we call as miscarriage. So of course that is because of you could say factors beyond human control, and there could be factors which are very much designed by human control. That is, there can be abortion. So the point is that so many things can go wrong at any moment. So even the very fact that we are alive is itself a miracle. And there are so many people, whatever age we may be at presently, there are so many people across the world who have died before they attained our age. So, we can look at our worst experiences and say the universe is terrible, God is terrible, or we look at our best experiences, say, yes, there is goodness in the universe. There is definitely some level of goodness in the universe. So now we will look at why is it that the Lord's actions and our actions, or why do our actions, why are we not able to make sense of the Lord's actions? Because our vision and God's vision, they're different. So one simple way to understand this is God sees the future and plans the present. We see the present and plan the future. So a child might be just playing and say, I'm playing today and tomorrow I'm going to do this play, and day after tomorrow I'm going to play there, day after tomorrow I'm going to do that. But the child has got some kind of defect or disease or disorder in the body, and maybe an arm is on the verge of getting dislocated or whatever. So child doesn't feel anything right now because of the exuberance of childhood. But the doctor says, we have to fix this right now. And he says, no, there's no need, I'm fine. But the doctor knows down the line, this is going to get you into a lot of trouble, a lot of pain it will cause you. So the doctor sees the future and then plans the present. Now we have to do this surgery. So from the child's perspective, hey, my life was going on very well. I was enjoying life, and suddenly I was forced into this hospital. My body was cut up, and now I'm in so much pain. What did I do to deserve it? Well, you could say, what did the child do to deserve it? Well, we could say, either we could look at the child's present situation and say the child didn't do anything to deserve it, or we can look at the child's future and say the child doesn't deserve the future pain that is going to come with that kind of arm. So the doctor is actually protecting the child from the pain. So now, at least with respect to, if we have some medical knowledge, we can understand to some extent what the doctor says. Yeah, I don't feel much wrong right now, but okay, if you're saying this, it makes sense. And they show you X-ray, okay, your arm is just, it's on the verge of getting dislocated. We have to fix this right now. So medical knowledge helps us to see, we could say, our medical future, even when we can't see it with our unaided eyes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Am I audible now?
Yes, Prabhu, you are audible now.
So, very sorry for it. The net just went off for a moment here.
Yeah, no.
So if we are looking at if we can get some spiritual knowledge, then that spiritual knowledge helps us make sense of things. And we may not be able to make complete sense of things, but it will help us to stick to doing, to not becoming, say, wildly disheartened or wildly resentful when some terrible things start happening to us. So now, how can we play our part? Okay, that just like a doctor is going through telling you have to do the surgery. Okay, what is my part then? Okay, that the patient also has a part. One part is, Okay, just accept it. For the next few days, you'll have to be in bed. You'll have to be immobilized. And then afterward, even if it is painful, we have to start moving that arm. So we could say that similarly, for us to be a part of the Lord's plan, there are two things. There is dependence and there is diligence. So dependence means there are situations where there's just nothing in our control. Our life was going in a particular way, and during that time, we just suddenly pulled out of that pathway in our life and dragged somewhere else. What is this? So okay, dependence in this has changed for me. It seems to have changed in a way that I can't do anything about it. So okay, what is your plan, my Lord? I accept it. I depend on you. So dependence in accepting whatever is beyond our power. And then there's also diligence in doing whatever is in our power. Even when a patient is, say, on the bed, the patient has to remember to take the medicines. As long as they're in the hospital, maybe the medical staff will ensure they take the medicine. But after that, after they go back home, they
Prabhu, you're not audible. Hare Krishna, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu.
Sorry about that. I have just changed my network.
Okay.
So hopefully it will be better now.
Okay.
So here, what are the Lord's dishonorable action was that he had asked for just 3 steps of land. And then he had also discoursed on avoiding greed. Bali Maharaj says, take more. He says, no, if I'm not satisfied with three steps, I'll never be satisfied. So that's all I want. And then after that, what he had done is, he had expanded his form unlimitedly. And so that Bali Maharaj, everything wouldn't be enough. So to get some sense of how this would work is, somebody says, I'm very hungry. Can you just give me one meal? They come to our home and said, oh, yeah, okay, if you're so hungry, yeah, sure, I can give one meal. But then, suppose they start eating and they start eating and they start eating. And they eat everything that is there for everyone else. They say, I want more, I want more, I want more. And then maybe we cook and offer everything that is in our house, and still it's not enough. And they keep eating. And then after that, we still want to stay. Okay, I'll offer you a meal, you say. We have to go out and buy food, and we cook and give that food to them. And they eat that. And then somebody says, they become, we spend all our money to try to feed them. And then say, you didn't feed me a meal. You are a liar. You say, what nonsense. I'm not a liar. You are a terrible person. So it's like that. The Lord apparently seems to have acted in a very dishonorable way over here. That's a rough equivalent. And then, so it's one thing that the Lord acts in a way that is questionable. So earlier I talked about the surgeon and the patient example. But there, at least in the surgeon, we know the surgeon is medically competent, medically trained, and the surgeon is acting in a reasonable way. Okay, it's easier to have faith. So, but when the Lord himself is here and the Lord who is supposed to be benevolent is acting in a questionable way, then what happens? At that time, accepting is very difficult. So not only the Lord acted in a apparently dishonorable way, but then he alleged to Bali Maharaj, hey, you promised 3 steps of land, but everything you had is covered in 2 steps. So where is my 3rd step? Because you haven't given me 3rd step, therefore you will be punished. So this can seem outrageous. So Bali Maharaj, you could say, he had reasons to feel not just wronged, but outraged. So to feel wronged is a milder emotion. To feel outraged is a much stronger emotion. As I said, the Lord had acted dishonorably and was accusing him of being dishonorable. And even in such a situation, Bali Maharaj maintains his faith. So where does he get that strength from? He gets that strength from, at one level, his own strength of character, that irrespective of how the other people act, I am going to stick to my word of honor. Just like, although Kaikeyi's demand was outrageous, send your own son on exile for no fault. But whatever you ask, I have to honor my word, and I will honor my word. So that is at one level he understood it. But another level, we see that his latent devotion was activated at that particular point. And that point I'll discuss in next session, where he talks about how Prahlad Maharaj's remembrance inspires him. But at this point, it is Bali Maharaj's astonishing acceptance. And he says, my dear Lord, that many times some protectors or guides punish their subordinates, but nobody has punished anyone the way I have been punished. So it's not in the egoistic sense, it's just objective. No, I did so much to honor my word, and still you are alleging me to be dishonored and punishing me. But I accept it. So this is like a sterling example of devotional resilience, even when disaster is striking upon us, and disaster seems to be coming from the very Lord who is meant to protect us. And Bali Maharaj, in that sense, exemplifies surrender. Even when there is a reason to not surrender, reason to rise in rebellion. How dare you act like this? But rather than rising in rebellion, Bali Maharaj surrenders. And no wonder that's why it's called the example of Atmanivedanam. So I'll summarize, and then we can have maybe a question, and then we'll continue tomorrow. So today I discussed about a quick overview of this 22nd chapter, where the major part is Bali Maharaj expressing his heart, and then here we have Prahlad Maharaj appearing and speaking, Vindhyavali speaking, Brahmaji speaking, and then the Lord himself speaks, and then the Lord rewards Bali Maharaj. That's the 36 verses. And we are on the first section. So I talked mainly two parts from Bali Maharaj's words and situation. First is, Bali Maharaj says, I will always be truthful. We talked about the importance of the word of honor in ensuring that the powerful don't abuse their power when situations change, either externally or when their own mind changes internally. And so the society can hold accountable through law, by the due process of law, those who do something illegal. But in some cases, not honoring one word may not be illegal, but it's immoral. So then shame can be a powerful deterrent for people to ensure that they honor their word. And in the world, to go on the wrong direction is so easy. That's why we need all the help that we can. So on the positive side, the help comes from love. Now we want to please those whom we love, and we don't want to displease them. So that motivates us to stay on the right path. At the same time, the wrong path may allure us. So then shame can deter us. If we do something wrong, a person will be shamed. And so we discussed how in today's world, sometimes that power of infamy, and the infamy coming from failing to honor one's word, that may have been devalued significantly. So Bali Maharaj is the head of the universe, and for such a person to be deposed and not just removed from power, that's one thing. Removed from universal rulership and maybe restored to their earlier position of, okay, you are the ruler of the demons. No, he's made a prisoner. That's as radical a reversal of fortunes that anyone can ever experience. So Bali Maharaj accepts that. Well, first is on the basis of his sense of honor, and second is about the Lord's plan we discussed. So he's accepting the Lord's plan. How? So if we want to look at whether life is fair or not, whether God is just or not, if we look at our immediate experiences, and especially we look at those immediate experiences when some bad things are happening to us, then actually we are not looking at the full evidence. If we look at our whole life and look at our best experiences, then many times we have got good things happening to us far more than what we deserved. And our very existence itself is a miracle. right from the act of conception is a miracle, from conception to the survival during gestation is a miracle, and then afterward, what to speak of it? There's so many dangers possible. So if we look at the big picture of our life, not just a comparative picture in terms of what happened yesterday and what I was thinking will happen tomorrow, or what is happening to me as compared to the people around me, but if you look at the big picture, we'll see that yes, there is an order to life. And then we talked about how medical knowledge can help a person understand, a child or a person understand, oh, you know, I was living fine. Why have been this operated upon like this? So similarly, spiritual knowledge to some extent can help us understand when things seem to go unexpectedly wrong for us. So we need to look through the eyes of spiritual knowledge, and we look at how especially extreme was Bali Maharaj's predicament. So he had every reason to not surrender but rise in rebellion, because it is the Lord who had acted dishonorably, saying that I only want 3 steps, and preaching about the importance of not being greedy, and then doing exactly the opposite. And then on top of that, accusing him of not honoring these words. So that's how he had every reason, but he did not. And the remembrance of Prahlad Maharaj's sterling example inspired him. So we'll continue this discussion in tomorrow's session. Thank you very much. Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.